Today we're going to be talking about modern states. And in essence, what modern states means is this is the period of independence movements that kind of start after World War I and then continue on after World War II into the present day. It really speaks to nationalism. Remember that nationalism not only is the pride in your country, but nationalism is also that sense of that people of a common culture and language to be together. So we're going to start in Turkey. And so remember that Turkey had been a part of the Ottoman Empire. And after World War I, remember that the Ottoman Empire fails. Now, some of this might be a review for a lot of you. And but this is part of this kind of bigger sense of what's happening. So the Allies really want to take apart Turkey, or really the Ottoman Empire. And Turkey doesn't want to have anything to do with that. They really are interested in self-determination. And that is led by this man here, Mustafa Kemal Atatürk. And anybody who had me, Ms. DeLong, knows how much I love Atatürk because I lived in Turkey for 4 years. And he gained fame in World War I as a military general who led victory at the Battle of Gallipoli. And then he is going to lead the Turks to rid Turkey of all of these foreigners. And so he is the one who is going to establish modern Turkey. He will be its first president and will successfully lead a war of independence to rid Turkey of all these foreign rulers. In 1923, they established the Republic of Turkey, and he was elected as its first president. He did loads of things to modernize the country. One of them was giving people last names. People didn't have last names before this. And one of those, he himself was given the title Atatürk, Father of the Turks. He also really wanted to westernize the country. He very much wanted to make it secular and get rid of any of the influence or extra influence that Islam had had under the Ottoman Empire. He also gave lots of rights to women. He changed dress to make it more Western and more modern. He changed the laws to make them based on Western law, not based on Islamic Sharia law. He also developed a new alphabet that they had been using. Turkish was a spoken language, not written. They'd been using Arabic as a written language, so he had a written language developed. You can kind of start to see why the Turkish people love him so much. All throughout Turkey, both of these pictures that I took, they're at his mausoleum where he's buried. This is at the center of Ankara, which he made the capital. And there he is on his horse. Every town that you go to in Turkey, you'll see statues of him. So again, all these different things that he did, the Western dress, education was very important. He gave women get the right to vote. 1929, just a couple years after the United States, and he just does more and more things to help improve the conditions of the Turks. So there are some videos and stuff on the Google Sites page that you can watch. There's one that was actually done called The Incredible Turk. It's an older little newsreel video. So we all talked about Gandhi before we left, so I just want to remind you about Gandhi, that India had been under British control, and so Gandhi is the one who is going to lead their fight for independence. The British are particularly concerned because there are two religious groups in India, the Hindus and the Muslims. And they fear that if they leave India that they're going to fight each other. And so what ultimately happens is when the British pull out is we will see two countries formed, India and Pakistan. So Mohandas K. Gandhi is the leader of this non-violence, passive resistance. And be careful. He said it's never passive. You have to invoke a reaction. And Gandhi very much influences Dr. King, who uses his civil disobedience and nonviolent resistance here in America in the civil rights movement. So remember, civil disobedience is when you choose to disobey a law that you believe is morally wrong and you're willing to accept the consequences. So a great American example of this is when Rosa Parks refuses to give up her seat on an Montgomery, Alabama bus, and she's put in jail for refusing to give up her seat. So she broke a law that she believed was morally wrong, and she was willing to accept the consequences. What happened after that was the Montgomery Bus Boycott, where African Americans refused to ride the Montgomery buses until they ended segregation on the buses. This is a form of nonviolent resistance. They walked to work, they carpooled, and it hurt the buses companies so much economically. They were losing so much money that they finally gave in and desegregated the buses. So this shows how nonviolent resistance can work. So there's a video on Gandhi, and there's a great John Green video that talks about this decolonization and nationalism movement and talks about a lot of these different countries. And so we're just looking at kind of snapshots at a couple of countries to focus on. So we see Africa is facing the same thing. Remember that Africa, every country except for Liberia and Ethiopia had been controlled by a European force. Egypt will be one of the first countries to break free, but the British will still maintain control of the Suez Canal. Some countries will break free violently. Algeria is a good example of this. Algeria was controlled by the French, and they will fight, and it will be bloody to get their independence. So much so that when Morocco, its neighbor, wants independence after Algeria from France, France is like, you can have it, because they don't want to fight another ugly war. Ghana is a good example of a country. So Ghana's down here. Ghana is a good example of a country that got independence from the British with a nonviolent means. So we're going to focus, though, on, I'm going to mention also one other one, Jomo Kenyatta, who led independence in Kenya. And so this is going to be important as you see that they'll get independence. He fought there. And then in South Africa is going to be where we focus. South Africa had been British, and they got an independence. But the problem is that the descendants of the British, white South Africans, controlled everything in the government. And if you remember back when we talked about imperialism in the Boer War, the British set up rules called apartheid. And apartheid literally means apartness or separateness. It's segregation. So the Black African majority in South Africa didn't have control. They had really harsh laws. They had to carry passes with them everywhere they went, even though the white South Africans didn't have to do that. They had to have permission to live on certain lands. And there was all just kind of crazy rules that were in this segregation. Nelson Mandela devotes his life to ending apartheid and spends 30 years in jail fighting for this. And jail in South Africa was not nearly like jail here. Like, he couldn't have all of his visitors. They had to bring him food, but he wrote letters like Dr. King does. He writes letters and books and inspires people from jail. Mandela had started off, he was a lawyer, very similar to Gandhi. And he starts off encouraging, of course, civil disobedience and nonviolence resistance. There was a lot of violent resistance in South Africa, and he's encouraging people to use other ways. Their meetings, though, were made illegal, and he, at that point, begins to support sabotage against the government, what the government considered terrorist activities. But it's all about your perspective, isn't it? So almost 30 years he's in jail. He was finally freed in 1990 by the current president at that time, de Klerk. And they then had, basically there was international pressure to end apartheid. Countries like the United States enacted sanctions on South Africa, meaning that we refused to trade with South Africa until they changed their policy. So finally, they ended apartheid. And you think about this, apartheid ends in 1993, like it's not that long ago. And, in the 90s, this is when I was in high school. And so it's really not that long that it's been ended. They then had the first free elections. And so you can see, like, look at the age here from young Nelson Mandela to old Nelson Mandela, who many people point out, yes, does look a lot like Morgan Freeman. And Morgan Freeman has actually played him in movies. So they were given the Nobel Peace Prize for what they did, and then they had free elections in 1994, and Nelson Mandela became the first Black president of South Africa. And this was the first election where all races could vote. So on the Google Sites page, there will be some more videos about Nelson Mandela. Really just, wow, what an amazing man. There's a fantastic movie, if you have the opportunity to watch it. It's just called Mandela. Has Idris Elba. He plays Mandela in it, and it's a fantastic movie telling his story. Gosh, so many fantastic quotes by him. He's so admired around the world. Now, I'm going to move from these guys, and we're going to move to the Middle East. I'm going to flip over to this sheet. So you guys have this in your packet. So here I've got Nelson Mandela, that South Africa, had been a British colony, apartheid, separated everyone, and that Nelson Mandela fought against that. I have up here Gandhi, and you can see here Pakistan and how that, the country was split up. And today we have Bangladesh, India, and Pakistan. Also here I mentioned there's peaceful here in Ghana, that out in Algeria there was war. Kenya, Jomo Kenyatta here, that there was a violent struggle, but Jomo Kenyatta was successful. So in the Middle East, so we have Egypt here, and then right beside it, which you can't see on this map of Africa, would be Israel. It's in the Middle East. So the other two people that are important to know is this woman here, Golda Meir. So Israel becomes the nation of Israel after World War II. There is a huge Zionist movement for Jews to be able to go back to their homeland. And so the United Nations devises a plan to create two new countries, Palestine, which would be an Arab majority, and then Israel, which would be a Jewish majority. So immediately after World War II, this Israel was created, and Golda Meir was the Prime Minister of Israel. She's considered to be an Iron Lady. Immediately after Israel declared its independence, all of its countries that bordered it, which were all Arab nations, all declared war on Israel. Israel was successful, and a lot of that has to do with the support that came from the United States because they were such a new country. And Golda Meir is famous for leading them to victory in the Yom Kippur War. So these countries that all around them, like Egypt and Jordan, Syria, lost land to Israel. And so the United States decided to kind of get involved in this to help broker some peace with the countries. And so Egypt, due to peace talks with the United States, eventually became the first Arab nation to recognize the nation of Israel. And Gamal Abdel Nasser, he had been president during this time, and he allied himself with the Soviet Union. So we've got kind of different people during the Cold War. Remember that the United States is going to side with people who are not communists. And if you were a ruler of a country, you basically had a choice. Do you pick the Soviet Union or do you pick the United States? So Nasser, who had been mad about, Egypt recognizing Israel, he decides that he's going to side with the Soviet Union. And he also nationalized the Suez Canal, which took it out of British control. And he built the Aswan High Dam, which controlled the flooding of the Nile River, which had some good and negative effects as well. It increased the salinization, the salt content of the water, which makes it less fertile along the riverbanks. But the controlling of the flooding was huge. So these are all the people that you need to know. There's another cheat sheet that you can use as well to help you with some of the Chinese leaders that are during this Cold War time period.